The NFL is constantly evolving, but sometimes it doesn't just adapt naturally. Sometimes it's forced to change because of a single player. Whether they were too dominant, too reckless, or simply too ahead of their time, these athletes didn't just play the game, they reshaped it. Today, we're diving into the NFL players so influential that the league had no choice but to change the rules. These aren't just athletes, they're catalysts. Their styles, decisions, and dominance force the league's hand, shaking the very foundation of football as we know it. Let's start with someone who towered over both defenders and the rulebook, Bronko Nagurski. Back in the early days of football, Bronko was a 6'2", 235-pound fullback, in an era where most players barely cracked 200 pounds. He was a bulldozer. At one point, he ran through a defensive line, plowed over a linebacker, trucked a safety, and then barreled into the end zone, knocking over a poor referee in the process. He was so powerful that the NFL had to change rules on forward passing and backfield blocking, limiting what fullbacks could do and how they could line up. He was a force of nature who played like he had no idea there even were rules. Fast forward a few decades, and you get to Sammy Baugh, one of the league's earliest superstar quarterbacks. In the 1940s, Baugh revolutionized the passing game, turning what was once a gimmick into a legitimate offensive weapon. Before his era, an incomplete pass that landed in the end zone was counted as a turnover, a draconian penalty. But Baugh's deep ball precision forced the NFL to modernize. The league revised the rule to treat those passes as simple incompletions, a change that opened the floodgates for the modern passing explosion. Without Baugh, you don't get Marino, you don't get Brady, you don't get Mahomes. Then came Deacon Jones, a fearsome defensive end for the Rams in the 1960s. He was raw power and unfiltered aggression. Deacon popularized the term sack, even though it wasn't an official stat until long after he retired. But his most feared move? The head slap, a violent swat to an offensive lineman's helmet to knock them off balance. It was jarring, dangerous, and effective. So effective, in fact, that the NFL banned it in 1977. The league cited player safety, noting that the move contributed to concussions and neck injuries. Jones's legacy is felt today, not just in highlight reels, but in the protective measures now embedded into the rulebook. Now, let's talk about the infamous Holy Roller game and how Ken Stabler and the Raiders exploited a loophole in the rulebook. In a 1978 game against the Chargers, with just seconds left and trailing by 6, Stabler intentionally fumbled the ball forward as he was tackled. His teammates batted and kicked the ball further downfield into the end zone before falling on it for a touchdown. Technically legal, but blatantly unfair. The NFL responded immediately, enacting the Holy Roller rule, which prohibited advancing a fumble in the final 2 minutes of a half or on fourth down, unless the player who fumbled recovers it himself. It was chaos, turned into regulation, thanks to a quarterback who understood the rulebook almost too well. Sticking with the Raiders, we have Lester Hayes, one of the most feared cornerbacks in the late 70s and early 80s. His specialty wasn't just sticky coverage, it was stickum. This ultra-adhesive substance made it nearly impossible to drop a pass. Hayes would cover his hands, forearms, and even parts of his jersey with the stuff. It became a joke around the league. Some said he could catch a greased watermelon, but the NFL wasn't laughing. In 1981, they banned stickum and similar adhesives, citing an unfair competitive advantage. Wide receivers and defensive backs would never again be able to glue their way to greatness. One of the most controversial rule changes in recent memory came because of Tom Brady, and not necessarily because of how he played. In the 2001 AFC divisional round, the infamous tuck rule was born. Brady appeared to fumble the ball after being hit by Raiders cornerback Charles Woodson, but officials ruled that Brady's arm was in motion, even though he was clearly trying to tuck the ball, and called it an incomplete pass. The Patriots kept the ball, forced overtime, and won the game, and eventually the Super Bowl. The outcry was so loud and the rule so confusing that the NFL eventually abolished the tuck rule in 2013. Brady didn't just win games, he made the league rewrite its definitions. Now, on the flip side of offense, Mel Blount, a cornerback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a one-man wrecking crew in coverage. In the 1970s, Blount used a bump-and-run technique that essentially allowed him to mug receivers all the way down the field. He was big, strong, and relentless, and he basically eliminated wide receivers from entire games. Offenses were handcuffed. As a result, the NFL introduced the 5-yard contact rule in 1978, limiting defenders to making contact only within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. It was a game-changing adjustment that helped usher in the pass-happy offenses we see today. Even kickers got in on the action. Tom Dempsey, born without toes on his right foot, made history in 1970 by kicking a 63-yard field goal, at the time, the longest in NFL history. He wore a custom, flat-front kicking shoe that helped him strike the ball cleanly. While many saw it as inspirational, others believed the shoe gave him an unfair mechanical edge. The NFL quickly responded by tightening equipment regulations, especially for kickers. Any specialized gear now had to be approved by the league, ensuring it didn't offer an unapproved advantage. Peyton Manning also left a mark, not with one moment, but with his methodical manipulation of the game. Manning's hurry-up offense in Indianapolis turned tempo into a weapon. He rushed to the line, caught defenses off guard, and exposed teams that couldn't substitute in time. He turned the play clock into a strategic advantage. In response, the NFL adjusted substitution rules, allowing defenses time to match offensive personnel under certain conditions. Manning essentially forced the league to acknowledge that strategy itself could be a form of domination. Troy Polamalu, with his flowing hair and unparalleled instincts, became a defensive playmaker like no other. He didn't just react, he anticipated. One of his most iconic plays involved timing a leap perfectly over the offensive line to block a field goal attempt. At the time, there was no rule against it, but the sheer danger and unpredictability of the move led the NFL to step in. Eventually, a rule was put in place banning players from leaping over the line unless they started outside the tackle box. It was another example of one player's brilliance becoming too dangerous to allow unchecked. And then there's Brett Favre, the Iron Man of the NFL. With 297 consecutive starts at quarterback, a streak unlikely to be broken, Favre endured hit after hit throughout his career. As defenses became faster and more violent, quarterbacks were at increased risk. The league recognized the need to protect its most marketable and valuable players. As a result, rules began to shift, banning hits below the knees, helmet-to-helmet contact, and hits on quarterbacks who had already released the ball. Favre was tough enough to survive the punishment, but the league decided future QBs shouldn't have to. Clay Matthews and Aaron Rodgers also found themselves at the center of rulebook evolution. In 2018, Matthews had multiple sacks nullified because he landed on quarterbacks with his full body weight, a technique that was legal for decades. However, the NFL had just seen Rodgers go down with a shoulder injury the year prior due to a similar hit. To protect quarterbacks from broken collarbones and other major injuries, the league clarified the roughing the passer rule. It was no longer about intent, it was about outcome. And then there's the wide receiver position, a role that's changed as much as any in NFL history. Odell Beckham Jr. redefined what fans and players thought was possible with a single, gravity-defying one-handed catch on national television in 2014. But while OBJ expanded the imagination of what a catch could look like, Des Bryant and Calvin Johnson forced the league to reconsider what a catch was. Johnson's controversial drop in 2010 and Bryant's no catch in the 2014 playoffs exposed inconsistencies in how officials interpreted the rule. In 2018, the NFL rewrote the catch rule entirely. Vontaze Burfict, the Cincinnati Bengals linebacker, didn't just play on the edge. He lived there. Known for his physicality and violent hits, Burfict's repeated infractions became a lightning rod for debate about player safety. Helmet-to-helmet contact, blindside hits, and late hits were all part of his reputation. After a string of suspensions and fines, the NFL began enforcing stricter targeting rules. Automatic ejections, enhanced replay reviews, and several high-profile rule revisions followed. Burfict's legacy is controversial, but undeniably impactful. Cam Newton also changed the rulebook, but not through fouls or controversy. Instead, it was his style that forced a reckoning. Newton, A former league MVP was a 6'5", 250-pound quarterback who ran like a tight end and threw like a cannon. Defenders didn't know how to hit him. Was he a runner? A passer? Both? As a result, referees often swallowed their whistles, allowing hits on Newton that would have drawn flags for Brady or Breeze. The league took notice and began retraining officials to ensure that all quarterbacks, regardless of size or play style, were protected equally. As the modern game continues to evolve, two names stand out: Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. These quarterbacks defy convention. They escape pressure, throw across their bodies, launch deep passes off one foot, and force defenses to cover the entire field for the entire play clock. Their style has exposed a new problem for the league. How do you officiate quarterbacks who don't fit traditional molds? Should a QB on the run be treated like a runner or passer? What if he's throwing from outside the pocket with one foot in the air? These questions have already prompted subtle clarifications in officiating guidelines. And then we get to Tyreek Hill, a player whose game-breaking speed has redefined how teams build their defenses. At just 5'10", Hill doesn't look like your prototypical wide receiver, but once the ball is snapped, he's a blur. Defenses now routinely assign two safeties over the top just to keep up. Teams are drafting long, rangy corners and prioritizing 40-yard dash times in a way they never did before. Penalties for defensive holding and pass interference have gone up as DBs struggle to keep pace with athletes like Hill. We also have to mention Michael Vick. Before Lamar Jackson, before Josh Allen, there was Vick, the original dual-threat quarterback. In the early 2000s, Vick's ability to make plays with his legs broke defensive schemes. Defensive coordinators had to develop spy concepts and contain rushes, fundamentally shifting how the position was defended. The league didn't change rules because of Vick, but he changed how the game was played, and that's just as powerful. His legacy lives on in the modern QB archetype. Even special teams weren't immune to player-inspired adjustments. Devin Hester, the greatest return man in NFL history, was so electric that teams stopped kicking to him entirely. His threat on punt and kickoff returns altered field position strategies and made coaches rethink risk versus reward. The league, concerned about players' safety on kick returns, which often feature high-speed collisions, moved the kickoff line from the 30 to the 35-yard line in 2011. This increased touchbacks and decreased return attempts, reshaping one of the game's most exciting plays. And finally, let's not forget about the influence of coaching masterminds like Bill Belichick. While not a player, Belichick's use of loopholes, such as manipulating clock rules late in games, has forced the NFL to make procedural changes. In a 2019 playoff game, he exploited a quirk in the rulebook to run off nearly 2 minutes of clock without snapping the ball. That offseason, the NFL closed the loophole. It's a reminder that rule changes aren't always about physical dominance. Sometimes they're about intellectual domination. So what do all these athletes and coaches have in common? They didn't just play football, they redefined it. Through talent, creativity, or controversy, each of them challenged the status quo. They exposed vulnerabilities in the rulebook, pushed boundaries, and in doing so, forced the league to evolve. The NFL is a better, safer, and more exciting game today because of them. And as new stars rise, the rulebook will keep growing, adapting to the next wave of greatness that dares to challenge it.